What if I told you that one of Africa's most outstanding independence leaders left office with less than $8,000 to his name? Unbelievable, right? What if I told you again that this leader led a nation for 27 years and by the time he left office, he had no house and had to be accommodated in a mined guest house? When you talk of African independence struggles, leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Nelson Mandela, Jomo Kenyatta, and Patrice Lumumba are at the forefront of discussions. But there's another great statesman who is rarely talked about.
I can never sell out Africa. Never. Not me. Not these boys here. Not these girls here. We are men and women of principle. We have done all these things in search of peace. But it has to be genuine peace, based on sincere, genuine majority rule. Anything else, you can kill us. Zambians who will be born out of our blood will continue to fight. We are such a people.
This man was one of the most influential Pan-Africanists of his time. He made his country a haven for freedom fighters. He led one of the few African countries that experienced no civil wars or coup d'etat. And by the time he died, 7 countries declared days of national mourning in his honor. But like many great leaders, his legacy is divided. While he's revered internationally as a hero of African independence, Kenneth David Kaunda is remembered with mixed feelings in Zambia. Although a man of high integrity, he led Zambia with an iron fist. He consolidated power by crushing opposition and banning all political parties, making Zambia a one-party state. He inherited one of Africa's most promising economies, but by the time he left office as president, the nation was one of the poorest in the whole world. Today, we will tell the story of Keke, the Malawian who fought tooth and nail for Zambia's freedom and in the process came its independence. After 7 children, Reverend David Kaunda and Helen Kaunda were ready to retire from childbearing. The Luba mission in Chisali was ripe, and as ancient texts will say, the laborers were few. Then the unexpected happened. Helen became pregnant again. With the work in the mission and the responsibilities for 7 children, Reverend Kaunda knew that the task ahead was not an easy one. It was a task that they never foresaw. On 28 April 1924, Helen Kaunda gave birth to the 8th child of the family, and they called him Buchizia, meaning the unexpected one. A celebrated young infant, but they never really expected him. Reverend David Kaunda was born in Nyasaland, present-day Malawi, where he received his basic education and training to become a missionary. He was ordained a missionary by the Church of Scotland and sent to Luba Mission, where he worked both as a missionary and as a teacher. His wife Helen also served as a teacher in the mission. She was the first African woman in Zambia to become a teacher. With both his parents as teachers in the 1920s, it would be accurate to say that Buchizia was born with a silver spoon. African teachers were the most educated in colonial Africa. And if your parents were teachers, that would make you one of the most privileged Africans. Everything seems in place for young Buchizia to have a great future. His father baptized him and he was named Kenneth Kaunda. But a few years after that, another unexpected incident occurred. Reverend David Kaunda died, and that began the family's woes. Kenneth Kaunda was just 8 years old when his father died. With 7 of his siblings, his mother now had the responsibility of raising 8 children alone. The silver spoon was lost, and the once short future was standing on shaky ground. His mother enrolled him at the Luba Mission School, where he received his basic education. He then moved on to Monali Training Center in Lusaka, where he was trained as a teacher between 1941 and 1943. Kenneth often did menial jobs to support himself and raise his school fees. He was a very good football player and a lover of music. After he completed his training in Lusaka, he began teaching in his upper primary school in Luba in 1943. He became the school headmaster from 1944 until he left school in 1947. He founded the Farmers Cooperative in Salisbury and Bindura Mine Copper Mining Area in 1948 and also became the mine's welfare officer. All the while, Kenneth Kaunda could not leave his passion for teaching. He served as the headmaster of Mufulira Upper School from 1948 to 1949. While teaching, Kenneth Kaunda fell in love with Mahatma Gandhi's writings, saying Gandhi's writings went straight to his heart. It was during this period that he was introduced to the freedom and human rights movement. During this period, he was the leader of a Pathfinder Scout and choir master at the Church of Central Africa. He also became the vice secretary of Nchanga branch of Congress. Armed with the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, Kaunda entered politics in 1949. He was a founding member of the Northern Rhodesian African National Congress. He moved to Lusaka in 1953 and was elected Secretary General of African National Congress, ANC, under the presidency of Hari Nkumbula. Nkumbula and Kaunda launched the land rights case against the colonial authorities but lost. They were imprisoned for 2 months with hard labor for possession of what the colonial authorities termed subversive material. The combined efforts of Nkumbula and Kaunda failed to mobilize enough native Africans for the fight against the Federation. So these two forces eventually drifted apart. Kaunda led a dissident group and founded the Zambian African National Congress, ZANC, in October 1958. However, this party was banned after an upsurge in civil disobedience, and Kaunda was sentenced to 9 months imprisonment in 1959. He served his prison sentence first in Lusaka and then was moved to Salisbury, present-day Harare, where he finished his sentence. On 6 January 1960, Kaunda was released from prison. But before his release, the ANC had another breakaway faction which formed a new party called the United Nations Independent Party, the UNIP. UNIP was a new party in name, but in reality it was a replacement for the banned ZANC. The first president of the UNIP was Menza Chona. However, he did not see himself as the founder of UNIP. So immediately after Kaunda was released from prison in 1960, he was elected UNIP's president. The same year, Kaunda visited the popular civil rights activist Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. When he returned, he organized a civil disobedience movement known as the Cha-Cha-Cha campaign. Cha-Cha-Cha campaign was a popular dance in the 1960s, similar to the dance to symbolize that it was time for Britain to face the music of Zambian independence. And all Zambians were ready to dance to this tune. The campaign began in earnest with strikes, boycotts, arson, blocking of the road and protests in Lusaka and across the country. In the words of Kaunda, even the Queen would also dance Cha-Cha-Cha. Cha-Cha-Cha is for all. These words meant that the action would go on until victory was won. As it were, and the whole community were dancing together in unison and nothing would shut them down. The people were so passionate about this dance that it became uncontrollably violent. The rhythm became irresistible to the Federation, and in 1962, a new constitution was formed that allowed Africans to run for legislative offices in Zambia. Kaunda contested as candidate for the UNIP, but the result was declared inconclusive. Kaunda reunited with his former ally, Nkumbula of the ANC, and they formed a coalition government with Kaunda as the Minister of Local Government and Social Welfare. This government became the colony's first government with an African majority. The music became too loud and was everywhere. Britain had no option but to dance to this tune. In January 1964, the UNIP defeated its rival, the ANC, in the elections, securing Kaunda's position as Prime Minister. On October 24, 1964, Zambia was declared an independent state with Kenneth Kaunda as its first president. Having just been liberated from capitalist oppressors, African independence leaders saw an example they should not follow. To go against colonialist oppressive ideas, some of them formed their own philosophies, which were largely socialist. Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere were the leading thinkers of this African socialism. Influenced by their ideas, Kaunda formed what he called Zambian humanism. Zambian humanism was adopted as a national philosophy in 1967. This ideology consisted of adopting African traditions underpinned by the Christian faith. He believed that if you love your neighbor as yourself, you will not exploit them but work together for the common good. Love your neighbor as yourself became the mantra of Kaunda and his Zambian humanism. The philosophy of Zambian humanism was very important to Kaunda. He felt this was the only way to bridge the gap between the different ethnic groups in Zambia, which was largely poor and uneducated. At independence, Zambia had a very poor educational system. The country had only 100 graduates, and not more than 6,000 indigenous inhabitants had 2 years or more of secondary school education. For a country of about 3.5 million people at the time, this meant that only about 0.02% of its indigenous inhabitants were graduates. There was much to be done. But thankfully, the newly independent state had a man equal to the task. Kaunda invested heavily in education in Zambia at all levels. He instituted a policy where all children in Zambia were given free exercise books, pencils, and pens. The parents' only responsibility was to pay a small token for fees, provide uniforms, and ensure that the children never missed school. He built primary and secondary schools around the country to ensure that all children of school-going age were enrolled in school. In 1966, he built the University of Zambia in Lusaka with donations from Zambians all over the country. He also built another campus in Kitwe, which was later renamed Copperbelt University. He went on to establish several institutions for higher education, and by the time he left office, about 80% of Zambians were educated. Although Zambia's educational system was poor at independence, its economy was one of the most promising among African nations. Like many African countries, it had rich deposits of minerals and arable land. The country is landlocked, but it is home to the beautiful and scenic Victoria Falls. Initially, Kaunda's government followed a fairly liberal and political philosophy, but it switched shortly afterwards to more restrictive policies. The booming copper encouraged Kaunda's state-controlled policies. He nationalized Zambian mining corporations and electricity distribution companies. This was one of Kaunda's gravest mistakes because during the 1970s, oil and copper crashed, and the Zambian economy suffered a heavy setback. The country fell into debt with IMF, and the IMF eventually forced Kaunda to privatize some of the state-owned corporations. This remedy came when Zambia's economy was already in shambles. There was a growing decline in GDP per capita, and 71% of the population were already living in poverty. At the time Kaunda left office, the World Bank classified Zambia as one of the least developed countries in the whole world. One of Kaunda's major faults as president was the creation of personality cult. He did that by surprising opposition or convincing them to join the UNIP. His first success came when he convinced Nkumbula to join the UNIP. With Nkumbula as a member of the UNIP, the ANC was now a toothless dog. It was not just toothless, it had lost its voice also. With Nkumbula, the dog has lost its ability to bark. Armed with these successes, Kaunda moved to amend the constitution, declaring all other parties illegal except the UNIP. With UNIP as the sole legal party, Kaunda became his candidate in the 1978, 1983 and 1988 elections, winning all with over 80% of voters' approval. The man who fought to free his people from the clutches of colonialists has now caged and personalized them. He was passionate about Zambia, but his passion was beginning to consume him, and he did not realize this.
Our policy is one which is called by an Afrikaans word apartheid. And I'm afraid that has been misunderstood so often. It could just as easily, and perhaps much better, be described as a policy of good neighborliness, accepting that there are differences between people.
Kaunda was a strong critic of white minority rule and especially white oppression in South Africa. His Zambia was home of freedom fighters across Africa. He was one of the leaders who ushered in the independence and fought for the fall of apartheid South Africa. He was such a thorn in the flesh of President Botha that Botha angrily declared in his resignation speech that the ANC is enjoying the protection of President Kaunda and is planning insurgency activities against South Africa from Lusaka. It was no news that Lusaka had become the place where many freedom movements in Southern Africa planned their activities. It was a home for the exiled. Zimbabwe's current president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, lived in Zambia. Very notable leaders like Oliver Tambo, Sam Nujuma, Robert Mugabe, Savimbi, and many others lived in Zambia as exiles. However, hosting this freedom struggle was not on a platter of gold for Kaunda. There were times his country suffered colossal losses of life and property, but for Kaunda, that was the price for liberating the region. And the Zambians were ready to pay it. They paid the price. That is the reason the countries in the Southern African region enjoyed trade within their borders without restriction. Kaunda planted trees. Unfortunately, he did not live long enough to enjoy its shade, but he left a better environment for his grandchildren. Kaunda's implementation of one-party rule and nationalization policies were aimed at fostering unity in the country. In defense of his one-party state, President Kaunda said that the political parties were encouraging ethnic strife. Therefore, there was a need for the nation to adopt just one party, which will accommodate all Zambian people regardless of their ethnicity. However, these reforms eventually led to a political unrest and economic crisis in Zambia in the late 1980s. By July 1990, a pro-democracy movement had erupted in Lusaka. This movement led to demonstrations for 3 days, calling for a return to multi-party democracy in Zambia. In response, Kaunda announced a referendum on whether to allow a multi-party state or not. However, he maintained that only a single-party system would prevent the country from tribalism and violence. By now, opposition pressure was getting stronger. It became very obvious that citizens wanted a multi-party democracy, and Kaunda had no option but to grant the citizens what they wanted. He cancelled the referendum and recommended a constitutional amendment that dismantled UNIP's monopoly of power. To his credit, Kaunda read the times correctly and did not resist. Although his tenure was to run until 1993, he cut it short and announced that election would be held in October 1991. At the polls, he was defeated in a landslide by his successor, Frederick Chiluba. When the results were announced, Kaunda had only 24% and Chiluba had 75%. Kaunda called Chiluba immediately and congratulated him, saying, "My brother, you have won convincingly, and I accept the people's decision." However, the rivalry between Chiluba and Kaunda was just beginning. Kaunda clashed frequently with Chiluba's government. The new president attempted to deport Kaunda on the grounds that he was a Malawian. Chiluba amended the constitution to bar citizens with foreign parentage from contesting the presidency. He did that to stop Kaunda from contesting against him in the 1996 election. On 26 December 1997, Kaunda was arrested on charges of inciting an attempted coup by some disgruntled army junior officers. He denied any connection with such allegations and even went on hunger strike during his stay in prison. He refused to break his hunger strike until his friend and former president of Tanzania, Julius Nyerere, visited and convinced him to stop. Because of his influence in the region, many officials appealed against his arrest. He was released from prison and placed under house arrest for 5 months until charges against him were dropped. On 4 June 1998, Kaunda announced his resignation as leader of the United Nations Independent Party and his retirement from politics. Kaunda was stripped of his Zambian citizenship by a High Court judge in 1999. However, he challenged the decision in the Supreme Court, and the court declared him a Zambian citizen. After retirement from politics, Kaunda engaged in various charitable organizations. Most notably is his fight against HIV/AIDS. One of Kaunda's sons was claimed by this disease. On 17 June 2021, at the age of 97, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda was pronounced dead after a brief illness. Zambia observed 21 days of national mourning. Zimbabwe, South Africa, Malawi, Botswana, Namibia, Tanzania, Mozambique, and Cuba all declared days of national mourning in his honor. He died in a hospital in Lusaka. He had a single apartment outside of Zambia, and his account was less than $8,000 when he died. Although politically imperfect, Kenneth Kaunda was undoubtedly an icon of the African liberation struggle. He deserved to be among the top in the discussion of African independence heroes. What are your thoughts about Dr. Kenneth Kaunda? Please let us know in the comment box. Thank you for watching this episode. Like, share, subscribe, and invite your friends. Till I see you again, bye bye.